All right, I will then begin. Welcome, everyone, to the 2024 Global Symposium on Leadership and Project Management. Please note the symposium will be recorded, and once you're unmuted, you can ask questions at a later time. Obviously, if it's easier, please use the chat box, and we will be more than happy to ask your question for you to our guest speakers. My name is Dr. Les Stein, and I am very excited about the diverse topics we have in store for you during this symposium. First, however, I want to begin by thanking the leadership of Northeastern University's College of Professional Studies and the Symposium Committee for making this possible. The committee includes Dr. Jacques Alexis, Dr. Adel Zadeh, Dr. Omar Amer, Dr. Sriram Rajagopalan, Dr. Surhi Kovella, and me. I also want to acknowledge our student interns, Zita Alendowaka, who is pursuing a graduate degree in project management, and Sahil Karnik, who is seeking a graduate degree in information technology with a focus on database management. Their support and assistance for this important endeavor has been priceless. The theme for this year's symposium is Forging Frontiers, harmonizing business agility, innovation, and sustainability in a transformative landscape. I can tell you that Forging Frontiers is effectively second nature to Northeastern University's faculty, staff, and students. We pride ourselves on creating an innovative thinking environment with a global focus on improving people's lives. It is with that in mind that I want to introduce our keynote speaker. Adam Sandman is an accomplished entrepreneur, and I am proud to say that I not only know about his many professional accomplishments, but I've also had the pleasure of getting to know him on a personal level. Adam's love for programming and technology began at an early age, which explains why he founded Inflectra Corporation in 2006. Adam is a visionary leader who epitomizes the best in innovative and creative thinking. What appeals to me most are Inflectra's values, which are clearly a reflection of Adam's leadership. The company is driven by a people-first culture, focusing on customers rather than profits, creating a great team that is dedicated to success, and recognizing that the right workplace culture is the key ingredient to high morale and employee motivation. And with that, it is both my pleasure and honor to introduce our keynote speaker, the Chief Executive Officer of Inflectra Corporation, Adam Sandman. Adam, welcome, and thank you for being with us.
Thanks, Les. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me. I'd like to thank Northeastern for having me be the keynote speaker today. And Les, it's been a pleasure knowing you and meeting you in person in DC and also on many virtual events. So again, it's my pleasure to be the speaker today. And you're right. The timing is interesting. We are in the cusp of, I think, the next frontier of innovation and technology. And I think anyone right now who is graduating or looking to graduate, it's a very exciting time, fraught with risk and opportunity. And hopefully we can grasp that. So first of all, just to recap a little bit about me, and particularly if you want to get in contact with me, these days, the best places are LinkedIn and email. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Happy to connect back and chat, and email if you have any questions specifically to ask. I've been involved in technology since the age of 10. I used to be a programmer back when I was in the United Kingdom in secondary school, aka high school. Even maybe in middle school, I was programming in the playground and using the old computer. So I've always loved technology, but I also really love how technology and business come together to help improve people's lives. And innovation should really be about improving people's lives, not just technology for technology's sake. But enough about me. Let's talk about what we're here today. So I'm going to talk about a few things. First of all, what is innovation? It may seem obvious, but I think it's worth talking a little bit about innovation conceptually. I want to talk about some of the ways of innovation that I've lived through. And I'm 49, so I've been around maybe half my life, and it's amazing what I've seen, and things that we're going to see in the future will be just as amazing. I'm also going to talk about some of the things that are happening in the world, global forces, which challenge leadership. I'm then going to talk about what it means to be a courageous leader and some of the traits. And if we have time, we'll have questions. I'm not sure if we'll have time, though. It's quite a lot to pack in about 52 minutes. So we'll see how it goes. If we don't have time for questions, happy to answer them offline by email or LinkedIn. Okay, first of all, what is innovation? And everyone probably thinks they know what innovation is, but I did a little bit of research before the talk because it isn't always obvious. So we actually have three things that we often confuse with innovation. We have invention in this pyramid of like new ideas: invention, innovation, and improvement. And when you work at an organization like the company I work for or other places, you often will confuse these three. So invention is literally making something new. And that's often the world of basic science or academia, or it could be in a company. They come up with some completely new technology, which is completely groundbreaking. Maybe it's the very first mobile communication, the very first ability to create computer networks, the silicon chip, the transistor. These are basic inventions that are completely and utterly new. However, we haven't yet figured out how we use them. So invention is an interesting part of the story, but is not the only story. Then we have improvement. Improvement is taking something and making it just a little bit better. And many companies focus on improvement. We have products in the market that we add new releases for every month. Windows, Macs, every computer, iPhone, everything we have has new versions coming out every month. Maybe there's a new app, there's a better button, maybe the usability is slightly better, better charging life. They're all small things that make things better, but they don't fundamentally change the business. So that's improvement. So now we have these two kind of bookends. We have brand new inventions that don't yet have an applicability yet. We don't understand what they're going to do. And we have basic improvements on what we know and love. Innovation is that middle part. And it's that hard to define middle that I think is actually the most interesting. So as I said, invention is creating something new. Improvement is advancing a product, concept, or technology. But innovation is the most interesting because it is a fundamental and disruptive change, not just in technology, not just in business, but the intersection of the two. And it will fundamentally change how we live and work, fundamentally how we communicate with people, how we socialize, fundamentally change how our society operates. And it's often, I think, difficult we often confuse these three. We'll often look at something, we say, oh my God, this is such an amazing innovation. And if you actually look at it objectively, it's just an improvement. Or something brand new comes out and everyone's like, this is going to change the way we live. And for 5 to 10 years, it doesn't. And then suddenly it does. Because what we actually were looking at was an invention, and we hadn't yet discovered what the innovation was that would come from that invention. Now, that may seem a bit abstract. So I put together some thoughts of how I've seen in my lifetime new innovations. And these are things that are not inventions, they are not improvements, they are truly innovations. And the first one I've chosen is Amazon. Now, I remember when I was in university back in the 90s, seems like a long time ago, but it really, to me, it doesn't feel that long ago. The internet was, a brand new invention. Now, the internet's been around for a while. If you study the history of the internet, the ARPANET, it was built after World War II to share information between universities and industry and the military. That's what the internet was designed for. It was designed to be a network that could survive a nuclear war. So you think about that, that's a very basic technology. What's that got to do with retail and Amazon? Well, actually nothing. So the internet existed for 40 or so years, and suddenly in the mid 90s, Tim Berners-Lee at CERN comes up with the web browser. We'll talk more about that in a minute. So I don't want to spoil that story, but it was suddenly the ability to communicate online that Jeff Bezos at Amazon realized that we could now change how we interact with consumers in retail, and he realized very quickly that we could start with selling books. And if you read, there's a video he put online showing when he first started the company, they chose books because it was a non-perishable, frequently ordered item that people would buy online. Didn't require checking sizes, didn't require refrigeration. It didn't have to come in one day. It could come in a few days, and so on. And so Amazon started by just being a bookseller, and there were many other booksellers. And around that time, other people came online, started doing pets.com and various other single product category retail stores. But Amazon's vision was, it's like a big box store. Why do we have to sell one thing? We can sell everything. And then they decided they're going to become a logistics company, and they built their entire huge fleet of vehicles because the existing delivery systems weren't fast enough. They couldn't do 1 day delivery, 2 day delivery. So the entire retail industry has been changed because Amazon took a technology which is effectively the internet and the mobile and the web as it existed in the mid 90s, and they took that technology, They took the technology of what is, logistics and transportation and distribution, which exist, but re-optimized them around an online retail channel and did it in many ways ruthlessly at a level that no one had seen before, and fundamentally changed the economics of the industry. Like, in the old days, when you wanted something mail order, it could take 28 days to arrive. I mean, tell consumers today that you go online and order something, it will come in 28 days. They'll just not they shake their heads and laugh. That's the world we used to live in. So Amazon took a technology and they used it to revolutionize the industry. And any brick and mortar business that was around in the 90s, if they could look forward into the future now, they would realize they have to revolutionize their industry just to compete. And that's what you'll see with some of these topics, is that any existing business that was sitting on its laurels, thinking like, "Oh, I'm Macy's, I'm Blockbuster, I'm a retail store, I'm a department store. I'm just going to continue doing what I'm doing, and I'll be fine." That just shows that the technology in the industry can revolutionize and disrupt so quickly established businesses. So the next example is an interesting one as well. So I grew up obviously in the 90s. I remember buying CDs. If you're earlier, you might remember buying records or cassettes. The music industry actually kind of grew in the 1960s. So before the 1960s, music was fairly static. There was symphonies and recorded music. It wasn't until the 1960s that the entire pop music industry really launches, and you get this entire new industry, which is basically selling records, then tapes, then CDs, and the ability for people to make lots of money, royalties. An entire industry is born in the 1960s, and it lives mostly the same from the 1960s to, again, the late 90s, early 2000s. Up until that point, they had changed formats from record to tape to CD, 8-track, if you remember those. But fundamentally, it was still the same business. The technology may have changed, so they were improvements. So we can say that a record was improved by a tape because it was more portable, improved by a CD because it was higher quality and you could skip songs. But when the internet came along, it completely revolutionized not just technology, but it revolutionized the economics and the business model entirely. And Napster, I think, is one of the businesses that began that change. Now, it's not around anymore. And that's another topic we'll hear about, which is that many times the company that does the innovation, that is that change, isn't the one that necessarily benefits in the long term. I mean, nowadays, most people use Spotify or Amazon Music or other platforms that are actually effectively successors of Napster. But what was interesting is, up until this point, the innovation, the improvement in the channel was marginal, record to CD to tape. But suddenly the internet changed everything because it meant you could share music. You didn't need a music industry. You didn't need a publisher. You didn't need a distributor because it was all online. So suddenly you have an entire industry of record shops, distribution, pressing plants that made the physical media, the record studios, completely changed. And the cost of music changed because people didn't want to buy albums. They bought singles for 50 cents, a couple of dollars. So the entire economics have moved from basically recorded media to performance media. And in fact, the music industry now looks a lot more like it did in the 1940s and 30s in some ways, where you pay for performances and there's almost no money to be made in the actual recorded music anymore. So an entire industry has gone through its life cycle in about 50, 60 years, which is incredible to think about. So again, you're a record executive. There's a great video called The Outlaws on Netflix which includes Jimmy Iovine, who was the head of Universal Music, Interscope Records, and he talks about seeing Napster for the first time and saying, "Well, it's all over." He's like, "It's all over. This changes everything," and he was right. So again, imagine you're a music executive in the 1980s, 1990s. What do you do? How do you account for this? How do you adjust for this? If you're a movie executive right now or a television executive right now, how do you prepare for what's coming in video, which is essentially going to be very similar to what we're seeing, what we saw in music? So speaking of that, let's look at Netflix. Originally started as a mail DVDs through the post to disrupt Blockbuster, quickly became a movie and TV studio. And what's interesting about Netflix, if you again watch the story of Netflix, some great documentaries, they started in one business, which was to innovate in effectively the rental DVD business, because they realized that people hated the late fees, hated the complexity of the distribution channel. But then they realized that they themselves were going to be disrupted by online streaming, and that they couldn't no longer license the content for online the way they could on DVD because of the legal difference. And so they either had to become a movie in the studio, become a studio themselves, or they would be disrupted by the studios going direct to the consumer and bypassing Netflix. So again, technology change, which is the ability to stream video over the internet was a change. And Netflix, instead of becoming a company we talk about in the historical sense, oh, remember Netflix? They used to send DVDs by mail. Instead, they became a movie studio. They had to innovate to disrupt their own business model to actually become at the forefront. And nowadays, they are effectively a movie studio and TV studio. And then nowadays, if you think about it, when you think of a movie or a television series, you no longer think about it. Is this a movie that's going to be in the theaters? Is it a TV movie, a TVM? It's all the same now. My kids don't understand the difference that we used to have in the old days. To them, it's a show. It might be a single show, might be a couple of shows. If it's 5 shows, is it a movie with sequels, or is it a TV show? If it's 13, it's probably a TV show. But it's so fluid. And Netflix and all the people trying to copy them, again, have had to change the economics. And the economics of the TV industry, the movie industry are changing. And it's being very difficult. If you either have to adapt, or you will be a blockbuster, a forgotten store that sits by the side of the road, empty. Although I think there is still one blockbuster still left in the world, and there's a Netflix documentary about that, ironically. Okay, so again, looking at other industries, what else has changed? Transportation. I've just come back from a trip to Australia. I had to take a stop in the middle of the road in San Francisco because I missed my connection. And how did I get around when I was in both Australia and California and get back to the airport here in Washington, D.C.? I took Uber. I take Uber everywhere. I've taken Uber in Mexico. I've taken Uber in the United States, in Europe, in most cities, not everywhere, and certainly in South America and even in Australia. So wherever I go in the world, I can get around by Uber. Now, imagine 15 years ago that you were a taxi company. You had a medallion in your city. You had this in your family. You passed it down. Or you were a local taxi company working in a city in America, and you had a very stable, comfortable business. If someone had told you that in 5 years, and it was only 5 years, that every single taxi, in most cases, will be either out of business or significantly reduced. You'd go from maybe 10 taxi companies in a town to maybe 2, and even they would struggle to compete or have to become effectively an Uber provider. They would not have believed you. They're like, I'm a taxi company. I'm not a technology company. I don't worry about innovation. I've got my franchise. I've got my competitive advantage. My moat is my license. The city won't let anyone undercut that. And they were wrong. Uber has revolutionized that. Separately, Uber and other companies like Grubhub and Uber Eats, they are also revolutionizing food delivery simultaneously. So not just the transportation of people, but of food. So for example, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, you wanted something to eat at home. What would you get? You get Domino's Pizza or one of the other delivery pizza companies. You might get Chinese food. That's probably it. The range of delivery options was very limited. And now you can get any meal from any restaurant anywhere in the world at any time through one of these platforms. It's incredible, right? And we take it for granted this is the way the world is, but it really isn't. It's new and it's changed. And if you, again, were a restaurant company that focused on delivery, or you were a restaurant that didn't have delivery, you had to really think about, how does your business get disrupted? How does it change? And the pandemic accelerated some of that, obviously, but it's not the only thing. So what's going to change next? And interestingly, I was in San Francisco for an unenforced layover on Sunday. And as I was in the city, I saw these white cars zooming by with no drivers. And it's Waymo. And it's like, wow, this is incredible. And they're piloting it in San Francisco and Austin. But think about it here. I guarantee you in 3 years' time, that's going to be standard in every American city. Now, probably not in rural areas, maybe not other places, but certainly in America, it's going to be standard in most major cities that Waymo will be an option, a self-driving car. You won't need to have someone drive you anywhere. It's crazy, but that's coming. And to me, it was amazing to see this. But the people in San Francisco, it was pretty normal. They're like, oh, yeah, it's the Waymos. Yeah, that's normal. We deal with them. But that's, again, technology moves so fast that what was crazy in science fiction a week ago does become normal tomorrow. And suddenly every Uber driver, every Uber itself is going to have to evolve. So the disruptors become the disruptees really quickly. The other one I want to mention, and I'm going to talk more about this a bit later as well, is the iPhone. And the iPhone is a really good example, I think, of innovation. If you ever get a chance to watch the video, and I watched it recently because it's so inspiring, watch the video of when Steve Jobs introduces the very first iPhone. It's a masterclass in how you innovate and how you present innovation. What's interesting about the iPhone, and it truly is an innovation, is that it wasn't the first. So it wasn't the first phone. It wasn't the first music player. There were plenty others. It wasn't the first smartphone. There were plenty like the BlackBerry. There were a bunch of Motorola phones we used to use. There's a bunch of other sort of clones of semi-smartphones. It wasn't the first, GPS system. In every single category that it operates in, it was not the first. It wasn't the first digital camera. None of it was the first. However, it was the first to put it all together and integrate it in a way that everyone could use, and particularly the non-technology people. So back when music players were new, MP3 players, I remember my wife trying to use one that was very difficult. She wasn't a technologist. I am. Other people, my mother would never have thought of using a smartphone. She had no idea. The iPhone was the first device that everyone, regardless of their technology level, and actually even their age group, could use. So the innovation was to take what were basically 5 or 6 different categories of device and a new technology, which was effectively the 3G or 2.5G internet, which was a new invention. So put it together, and that's the innovation. So the inventions existed. Back to my earlier point, we've had several inventions: 3G internet, smartphone, LCD screens, touch screens. Almost every bit of the iPhone had already been invented, but there would never been an innovation using those inventions. And that's the key difference. And as a business leader, your job is to take those different inventions and figure out how to make an innovation from them that is both a new technology, but disrupts the industry. And the iPhone clearly did that. The iPhone basically destroyed the category of music players. It destroyed the category of digital cameras. You don't buy those anymore. They are no longer products. They are now features of a product. And that's what you often see in the technology space, is the aggregation, where formerly a product becomes a feature of a product. And that shows true innovation. Whereas just improving a mobile phone or a smartphone is an improvement. And you can argue that the iPhone now has been going through most of the improvements. We haven't seen many true innovations in the wearable device space. The iWatch, maybe the Apple Watch is one. The iPad is sort of maybe a bit of an innovation, but sort of an improvement of a phone. You can argue about that. But again, true innovation is really hard. It's a privilege if you're a part of a truly innovative product. Okay, so let's move on from some of these examples. One more I do want to quickly mention, though, is SpaceX. SpaceX is an interesting one because the space sector is been very static for a long time. If you look at movies, science fiction shows, they will show we should be on Mars by now. And we've really not really had the same progress in space that we've had in technology and information technology. But SpaceX is interesting. They changed the economics of space. My son works in the satellite industry. He launches satellites at Northrop Grumman. And one of the things is he told me is that they changed the economics so much that no one else can compete for certain kinds of launches. I think it's like a factor of 10. So they literally changed the economics of space access forever. No one can compete on that price anymore. Or if you do, you have to change your business model. And what they did was actually very interesting. Again, it wasn't invention. What they did is they took a bunch of very inexpensive rocket boosters, put them together, and use information technology to use those cheaper rocket boosters together in concert rather than building an expensive engine. And they like it to use like a Honda versus a Ferrari. They basically built an inexpensive reusable platform using off-the-shelf components in an innovative way. So the innovation was taking previously invented relatively low-tech rocket launching boosters, but using relatively new IT to bring it together. And the revolution was on the business. They changed the economics of space by a factor of 10. Now, if you're thinking about how do you get involved in innovation, is it luck? Is it foresight? That's a good question. Now, one of the things I would like to mention is the waves of innovation. And there's a great book I read recently. Oh, someone's circling something. Let me go back. Waves of innovation. I'll go back a second. Waves of innovation is a really important thing to think about because you have to get the timing right. And there's a great book I would recommend everyone read. A friend of mine gave it to me to read at the beach, and I read it within about 2 hours. It was so riveting. And this is only a piece of it. And some of this information does come from that book. He talks about innovation as well. It's a book called Smart Cuts by Shane Snow, and he's done extensive interviews with a variety of business leaders, technologists, and he likens it to a surfer. And in his book, he talks about surfers in California and Hawaii and the differences and so on. But one of the things they talk about is there are waves that are coming. And a surfer, if they're very smart and very good, will look for the wave and place themselves at the right place at the right time so that when the wave comes, they can harness it. And so a lot of it's like that. I mean, you could have been an amazing technologist, but if the conditions weren't right, and the timing wasn't right, it wouldn't necessarily work. And there are many products that we've seen where it was a quote ahead of its time, bleeding edge products that, whilst were cool, didn't quite make it. For example, electric vehicles. Notoriously, there was an electric vehicle that I think it was a GM built that never saw the light of day because battery technology wasn't ready. So if you look at Tesla, what it's done, it's largely been because we had the right battery technology. The lithium-ion batteries that exist now didn't exist 20 years ago, so the economics for for EVs, electric vehicles, was not right. The same thing with the internet. The internet came along, it was a fixed line internet. There was some Wi-Fi for sure, but it wasn't until mobile technology, the actual 3G or 2.5G mobile internet was fast enough and ubiquitous enough that the iPhone could be launched. Literally, the product would have fallen flat on its face had they tried to launch it maybe even 2 or 3 years earlier. The timing is right. And if they'd been 2 or 3 years later, they'd have probably missed the boat. So it's interesting that, right? So you've got to time things right. You don't want to always be the first mover. Microsoft created some tablets that were like the iPad years ago, didn't succeed. If you look at some of the early smartphones, they didn't succeed either. So sometimes you don't want to be the exact first. You want to be the fast follower. So you follow that wave. And when that wave happens, that new technology is available. You can either be the first to use it, or maybe you just become wait for the first movers and just follow, and then you can be in their wake. But being able to pick and read good waves is really good. Sometimes you don't have to be the best technologist, the best business leader. You just have to be able to find the right wave and be able to harness it at just the right time. Obviously, it's hard to always do that. One thing, though, is be open to new ideas. As a leader, it's often easy, I think, to get blindsided because you get so into your own product or your own category. And as a CEO, that's one of the things I always worry about is, we have our product, we have our customers. You get into your echo chamber and you talk to your customers and your partners and they love you and talk about how much they love you and amazing. And then you turn up overnight and a competitor has done something completely different. And your entire industry has gone from being a product to a feature of a product. And overnight you're obsolete. And those cycles are just getting faster and faster. So let's talk about some of these waves. This is what the first wave. I don't know if any of you have seen this. This is the first web browser. So this is back in 1995, 96. I used this. I remember I was in college and we had the internet for a few years, and it was basically a text-based experience. It wasn't what you would think of as the internet today. And that text-based experience had been around for a long time. And it was being used by universities, the defense, the military, and academia, as I mentioned. And that was mainly what it was for sharing files. And it had some basic email as well. But this was the first web browser that Tim Berners-Lee invented back at CERN. And then this is the NCSA Mosaic, a slightly different version made in the United States. It was a derivative of this. But this is the first web browser, and it's basically a page where you could have images, text, and links. That's all it did. It didn't do much else. And then some people started to take this technology and innovate from it. So let's think about that. So as I mentioned, the internet's been around since the 50s, but until the World Wide Web, which launched in 93, it wasn't accessible by ordinary people. It was simply technology. It was the realm of academics and business, not really business, really academics and the universities, the national labs, and also the defense and military institutions, because it was used by them to communicate information. And that's because of its history as effectively a national security-based platform, the ARPANET. People started linking into it, but it really wasn't until 93 that it moved outside of universities, academia, and government. The first browser was launched in 93. Within 2 or 3 years, you start to get the first businesses based on it. You get the Amazon.com, the Pets.com, you get the first .com boom. And it was amazing for me that someone could see this and say, oh, it's a text-based bunch of links and some images. How does that become an actual business? And I remember the first time I got the sense of this because a friend of mine was building some apps using some Perl scripts and some technology. And he said, look, it isn't just static. If we take that HTML page and we add something behind the scenes, we can have people enter information and it can do things. And we're like, oh my goodness, that allows it to be like an application that could be anywhere. And we're like, yes, wow, what could we do with this? And suddenly, within years, and I mean a few years from the moment that's launched, you have the ability to book flights online, tickets online. Particularly, they were targeting people who were technology savvy, people coming out of university for the first time. So the first users of the internet for commercial reasons were people who wanted to read information, the news, people wanting to be able to book things online. All the things that you didn't like doing in person, being stuck on the phone, we now made them online, made them convenient. Unfortunately, things like pornography are also one of the first use cases too, which makes sense because of privacy. So, innovations come from the idea of a new technology which has been around, but suddenly there's a new invention. And in this case, it was the web browser. The web browser was the true invention that allowed the innovation. I would say the web browser may be the invention, but it was the businesses and all the things that followed that were the innovations. Because it isn't obvious from this that you're going to have an online retail store, that you're going to have an ability to do maps and be able to do search and be able to have all the information in the world at your fingertips. At this point, it's a static bunch of linked pages for sharing documents. It takes innovative leaders to be able to imagine the vision from this starting point to the businesses that will follow. Now, the second wave, in my mind, and again, in the recent history, is this, when Steve Jobs launches the iPhone. And I've talked a little bit about this already, but it's again the same case. Mobile phones have been around since the 80s, the first big chunky analog phones. And then came the digital phones. I had my first cell phone in, I think, 92, just had basic texting and calling in Europe. America was actually behind at that point. And then we basically had the very first internet phones. And if you've ever used, you can't imagine it, the very first internet was called WAP, or Wireless Access Protocol. It wasn't a full web page. It was a series of little links and text. So in some ways, a lot like the original internet, but it was a completely different protocol, and it really was very basic. Didn't do very much. And then the BlackBerry was launched with the very first push notifications, texting, the ability to do messaging, BlackBerry Messenger. That and the push notifications were really its key application. But really, the iPhone in 2007 is what started the whole next wave of innovation, because now we have a smartphone, a new platform that basically allows you to have the full internet that we've had on the desktop machines and the laptops on a mobile device. But what was interesting that we didn't fully anticipate was, you think about that phone, you look at the apps, you think about what the internet looks like. It's not just simply that we took existing web applications and put them on the phone, although we did that as well. But there's suddenly a whole bunch of new applications and new business ideas that don't make sense until you have a smartphone. For example, something like an Uber or a device that, or Google Maps or any of the devices that use location services. Because once you have a phone that has the ability to tell with GPS to tell you where you are with a high degree of accuracy, and you have fast internet, you have a bunch of immersive applications and use cases that just didn't exist. I mean, Google Maps is the one we obviously all use, but things like Uber, which runs on Google Maps. So you have apps that now can live on other apps. And so it's this new wave of innovation that launched around mobile applications. I mean, apps like Tinder and equivalent dating apps also, because of the location-based services and the cameras, videos, it's these integrations of different technologies that creates these new business models. So imagine that you were a business leader in 2006. The internet's been around, you've got this browser, you've got apps that were built on the regular internet, as it were. And in 2006, the iPhone is launched, 2007, and you see that for the first time. And you own an application, a web application or a tech company. You have to think about how is this going to change your business, and it is going to change your business forever. So again, just because the internet was around, the smartphone was not an improvement, it was an innovation, and all the businesses that were on that platform now have to think about what is the disruptive effect of having a smartphone always on, always with you device. So for example, imagine you're a GPS manufacturer. You sell GPS devices to put in cars like Garmin, people like that. Guess what? You pretty much are either out of business or you have to specialize into a slightly different business. But people using a standalone GPS device for consumer use is gone. And that's what happened. So suddenly, what was a product segment, GPS devices, now becomes a feature of a platform. What's the next wave? So the next wave, and this is where I'm looking at people attending this conference to think big. The next wave, which we're on the cusp of, is AI. Generative AI is at the same point, or maybe a year now or later, than where we were when the web browser was launched. So AI has been around since the 70s. I remember being taught AI in school, in fact, in the 1980s. Behind the scenes, AI has been used by Google, by Amazon. They're using it in the government for things like passport recognition if you ever go to the airport, global entry. So AI is not new by any means. The technology, the neural networks, the deep learning, machine learning, it's been around for at least 5 years at scale, and it's been around for a lot longer than that. But until November 2022, and like when the internet browser, we always remember, when did I first use Mosaic? And I went, wow, this is going to change the world. In November 2022, I remember reading an article about this new chatbot that had been launched, ChatGPT, based on GPT 3.5. I remember using it and going, wow, this is crazy. This is different. It was the first time the public and consumers could use it themselves. Rather than it being embedded in an application that you have no visibility into, it was opened up to the public for the first time. And now we see all these new applications for it that we've never thought of. And the innovation is underway. There's a whole range of new businesses that are going to exist based on AI. So the question for me is, are you ready for that? If you were that business leader back in 2007 and the smartphone is being launched and you have you sell mobile cameras, you sell GPS devices, are you worried? You should be. If you're not thinking about how generative AI and AI in general is going to change your business, if you have a platform right now and you're not thinking about AI, or if you were thinking about launching a new company or a new business after you graduate, AI has to be part of your story, because if it's not, it's not gonna get traction. This wave is upon us right now. It's going to change everything we do. We don't know how it's going to change everything, but it's going to change education. It's going to change business, journalism. It already changes how we write software with things like Copilot. It's changing how we test software. There's autonomous testing tools coming on the market that will test software for you. It's coming in to help people write content, write blogs, answer questions, be customer support. It's becoming its own new category of product. And again, it's evolving very fast. So think about how this wave is going to impact what you do. So we'll take a little bit of break now and change tack a little bit, because innovation is cool and it's exciting to think about what the future could look like. But I also want to show you, when you're a leader, it isn't just about embracing the cool new technology or how to harness that, though that is definitely a large part of what you should be thinking about, but also how do you react to the changes going on in the wider world. So I thought I'd do this in my lifetime. So I was born in 1974. The year I was born, or I think maybe it's a year earlier, Britain joined the EU for the first time, which is kind of funny. I remember opening up the single market. Britain's going to be joining the EU. We're all going to learn foreign languages and we'll trade with our partners, global prosperity. In 92, there's the collapse of the USSR, the triumph of democratic capitalism. Basically, the world is coming together, connecting. And there's a famous book written called The End of History in the late 90s, which basically says, well, capitalism, democracy has won, global trade is the future. We're all going to get connected and it's going to be wonderful. History is going to end. There'll be no more wars. There'll be no more poverty, no more things to worry about. We can all sleep well at night. That was the end of history thesis. And then, of course, China joins the WTO, which really is the beginning of globalization. So taking that, for the next 20 years, we have probably the greatest rise in living standards across the world in history. I had a great talk from a dean at one of the public policy schools here in Washington, D.C. a few years ago. And he talked about between 2001 and 2020-ish, before the pandemic, we have the biggest rise in living standards across the world. And then politicians don't always want to talk about this, but it's true. We've lifted more people out of poverty than ever before. Wherever you are in the world, things were getting better and more connected. Goods were moving globally because companies could operate globally. And it's amazing. And then in 2020, we have the pandemic. Supply chains get snarled up. It's hard to get things. People start to retreat within their borders. Britain leaves the EU. So within my lifespan, I've seen Britain join the EU and leave the EU. And then Russia invades Ukraine, and for the first time in living memory, we now think there could be a war in Europe. And we now start to see the end of globalization. We're seeing large trading blocs emerge. The US-based Western trading blocs, Russia, China, potentially then the non-aligned India, China maybe, South America, Africa. We're seeing the world fragment into these different blocs. Is it the end of globalization? I don't know. And if you look back in history, which we often forget to do, we've seen this before. Before World War One, we actually had a kind of globalization 1.0. The telegraph had been invented. That was the new innovation back in the 1900s, 1890s. We had the telegraph and the telephone, and that connected the world for the first time. That allowed globalized companies, global companies, to operate around the world for the first time. We could travel by steamship, like the Titanic. We could use bell telephones to call people. So for the first time, we had global companies, and we all thought the world was going to get better. We invented electricity, and then of course you have World War One. And then the World War II and the Depression, and so suddenly the globalized world collapsed into a series of regional groups of war and destruction and the greatest loss of income and society we've ever known. So just because we see things getting better doesn't mean it has to be that way. And it's really the role of leaders and, hopefully myself, people in this room watching this today, as a leader, you have a responsibility to try and shape history going forward, learn the lessons from history. Now, obviously, as business leaders, we can't always be the ones to stop things happening, but we have to adjust. We have to recognize the world does change, and that we have to, our leadership is to provide that glue that holds our companies together, our societies. We have a responsibility beyond making money to help make the world a better place. And we are part of that. Now, we're not politicians, we are business leaders, but we still have a role, I believe, in helping to make the world better and to try and prevent these things, these calamities happening. So what's it going to be going forward in your lifetime? These are just some things that I think we should be worrying about. One thing is that we could have unlimited, abundant carbon-free energy from the sun. Solar and wind, maybe throw in some nuclear, some fusion, or even some micro fission. We could have more energy than we ever need before. Imagine we have free energy. Now, that sounds amazing. Well, it is amazing, but it will change everything. It will change how societies work and live. Maybe there'll be war over solar panels, over the materials. Who knows? But it's certainly something that you're going to have to prepare for. Could we have unlimited carbon-free energy? Could we have general artificial intelligence? I'm not talking about what we have today, which is really effectively a souped-up set of autocompletes on steroids. We're talking about general AI that can solve general problems, make general solutions. Does AGI become the government? I don't know. Think about a world like that where AGI is running everything. Another thing is obviously climate change, sustainability, and pollution. We see horrendous problems with fast fashion dumping fabrics all over the developing world. Recycling that doesn't get recycled because it ends up being just deposited in other countries. Climate change making parts of the world uninhabitable. Crops failing. The inability to feed populations. We have solved in many ways hunger and poverty through the Green Revolution. How do we think of the next revolution? How are we going to feed the world? How are we going to deal with that? We could have an increasing population in the developing world, but we're also seeing a declining population in the developed world. We're going to have more old people than young people. Who's going to care for them? Will it be robots? Will it be AI? Is there a business there? I don't know. How are we going to manage that? We've never had that before. We've never had a declining population in the developing world, the developed world at such scale. We're going to need technology to help run these countries. Maybe more immigration. Who knows? We're going to hopefully be multi-planet by then. If Elon Musk has his way, we'll be on Mars and other planets. I think in your lifetime, there's a good chance we will have a colony on another planet. How does that change the world that we live in today? Does it make us more or less careful about what we do on Earth? Pandemics, we've obviously had the COVID pandemic. Right now, everyone's worried about the bird flu. That could be another one. As the world warms, as we're more connected together, there's always the chance of this happening more and more. We need to plan for it. Another interesting one, which I read about in The Guardian, is the concept of rewilding. It's controversial, but rewilding is the idea that we can't necessarily put the world back to the way it was. We can't necessarily restore endangered species exactly where they were before. We can't undo invasive species, but can we at least be mindful about how do we build places for animals to live in the wild? That might mean having exotic animals in London or in the UK, places where there is population gaps. If we are seeing a declining population in the developed world, but an increasing population in the developing world, do we need to build large parks and reserves for animals in the developed world where we used to have cities? I mean, these are big challenges, interesting ones, but things that I think we need to think about. How do we adapt? How do we plan for? And the other one that will come out of nowhere when it happens will be quantum computing. If quantum computing does achieve what it says it can, it will break every encryption we have ever used all at once. And that will be the end of privacy. Every encrypted password, every encrypted hard drive, every blockchain that's using hashes, we will be able to break all of those in an instant. Suddenly, everything becomes available that wasn't. How do we deal with the end of privacy? We're already dealing with that with social media to some degree. This is taking it to the next level. So I would say these are some of the challenges that will be in your lifetime. And you're going to have to think about, I know I'm still here, so I'll be thinking about it too. How do we solve these problems? They're hard problems to solve, but we as business leaders, I think, can do that. So if you look at the innovation and what's available for the future, and you look at some of the challenges, I think what we call for is courageous leadership. And what is creative leadership? I got this online. It's basically you have to be very mindful about the new technologies. You have to be willing to take bold steps. But as Les said at the beginning, one of the soundest things about having, to build a company is having good culture and good values. If you start with a sound ethical compass and good values, it makes it much easier to be successful in some ways because you know where you stand. If you know where you stand and have confidence in your position and what you stand for, then you know how to make good decisions. And if you make a bad decision, you can also know how to undo that decision. So I think it's really important as a leader that not only do you look to the future, find that next wave that's going to propel you forward, but it's also to have confidence and know what your ethics are, what centers you. Your head is in the clouds, but your feet are on the ground, sort of thing. So it's important to stand up for what is right. Stand up for what you believe is the right thing to do, even when it's not necessarily the prevailing view. Be contrary. You have to look at this new technology is going to do these things. These are the consequences of that new technology. We need to obviously embrace this technology, but there are going to be losers from this technology. How do we mitigate that? How do we make sure that people are taken care of so we're not just simply charging ahead and leaving people behind? How do you make sure as a leader that when you have a new technology or a new idea, that other members of your team feel like they have a voice in it? One of the things is also the danger is if you have vision, that vision can be blinkered vision. And I always believe, at least the way I work, is to have a strong team around you that can challenge your ideas. And doesn't mean that you all have to agree on things. You don't necessarily want that consensus. Sometimes having those disparate views is good because it forces you to say, well, let's experiment with this thing. Let's find out if you're right or I'm right. Let's try it. I don't know if I'm right. You might be right. Let's try something. Let's experiment. And if we're right, let's go for it. If we're wrong, let's pivot. But I think you have to be courageous to try things, but you have to be humble enough to know when they're not working. And that's a hard combination to have. And I think it does require having a very strong ethical center for you. I was talking to a friend last night here in DC for dinner who works in the diagnostic space, and he was saying the whole Theranos scandal has destroyed funding for any kind of diagnostic tool and has really taken the industry back by 10 years. And that was, again, a lack of ethical accountability for people. They had a technology that didn't even work, promoted it like it did work, and not only did it damage and hurt people and kill people and affect people's lives, but it is damaged, an entire cohort of people who had actually good ideas. They won't get a view. So you do have an ethical responsibility, not just to fake it till you make it, but actually have the confidence in your ideas, but also the humbleness to realize when they're not working. I thought here's some examples I thought I put out there of examples of courageous leaders. Some of these people may not be popular, like Elon Musk. I know is not popular right now, but whatever he's done since, he was the first to prove that electric cars were viable. Before that, they were seen as basically an expensive, exotic technology for crazy technology geeky people. Tesla proved that they were actually cool cars that car people would like to buy, and really changed the industry and made it something that people wanted to buy. PepsiCo, Indra, she focused on switching to healthier products. For so long, they were focusing on fast food and soda, and they've actually expanded their view to move the company to becoming much more of a healthier product, waters and other non-soda, non-fast food products. There's an example in General Motors. If you look at a more traditional industry, Mary Barra, when she took over, there was a major recall because of a failure in an industry where the cars were having ignition problems and safety issues. Instead of simply brushing under the carpet, she did a major recall and rebuilt trust in the company. And if you look at some of the companies that are struggling right now, like Boeing, they need to, I think, a shift back to a safety culture because they've lost that, and it's really dangerous. Once you lose that, it's very hard to regain it. I mean, one of the my interesting ones is Microsoft. Microsoft, we all think now as Microsoft as being so successful with the cloud, with Azure, with OpenAI. They've made so many amazingly good moves, but yet 15 years ago, under Steve Ballmer, they were terrible. They were third in cell phones. They were third in cloud. They were third. The desktop, Windows desktop was losing traction against other platforms. Microsoft was nowhere. Google was eating their lunch on Gmail and Google Workspace. Microsoft was old tech and didn't seem to have a way forward. They've gone from being a third-rate tech company to being the number one. And that's very hard to do with a company that size. To be able to shift gears that quickly is incredible. Richard Branson back in the 80s, 90s, launching an airline and having to fight dirty tricks, which almost destroyed his business, having to be courageous, going to court. Read his story. It's interesting. He really had to fight to get where he is and be courageous at many times and choose the higher ground. Patagonia, then they are very focused on the environment. Even though they are a business selling clothing, which we know can be a polluting business, they're doing everything they can to reduce that. Well, most famously, they no longer make branded swag. So, when you go to a conference, you get swag like hats and gloves and jackets and things. And they used to make that stuff. And they realized that because it's branded with a company logo, people tend to throw it away or leave it in the hotel and not use it. And so they stopped that business. They said, we're getting out of that business. Even though it makes money for us, we don't want to be in that business anymore because it conflicts with our core values. In India, Tata has made India a global player. I mean, it's incredible. TCS and Tata owns Land Rover, Jaguar. They own steel companies in the UK. They've taken India from being what was then seen as a developing country to being a world country, a world-class player, which is incredible. And then another one that maybe not as well known, The Body Shop. She's passed away now. But when they launched The Body Shop, they were the first company to mandate they would only use cruelty-free cosmetics. And now that's pretty standard that you wouldn't test cosmetics on animals. But in those days, that was not the norm. And it was a horrific industry for cosmetics. I won't describe the stories because it's horrible. Go Google it if you want. But it's horrible what the industry was doing. And she changed the industry in making cruelty-free cosmetics that now became standard. So those are some good examples. So the last thing I want to talk about is some of the traits of courageous leadership. And I've got 5 of them. Things that I think really help you should have if you're going to be a courageous leader and you're going to lead and innovate. You're going to benefit from one of these waves that's coming, like the AI wave, and you're going to deal with all these big global trends that are maybe difficult, maybe awe-inspiring. First one is vision. You have to have the vision. Steve Jobs, people like that who've innovated, they had a vision of what they wanted, and people follow people with vision. So it's all very well being, a nice person and people like you, but if you have a vision of where you're going, people will tend to want to follow you. We're going to become, this kind of company. We're going to solve hunger. We're going to build the world's first, clean energy microreactor. Whatever it is that you want to set out in the world, think of what you want to solve. Build that vision. Be inspiring. Inspire people, and people will follow you. So the first thing is you have to have a vision that's compelling, interesting, that people want to follow. People want to follow something that's positive. So you have to be a visionary. The second thing is resilience. Anyone who's run a business or launched a new product will tell you, you don't get it right first time, and everyone's going to tell you 100 reasons why it won't work. You're going to hit into all kinds of obstacles. You'll be sued for patent infringement. You'll deal with trademarks. You'll deal with competitors trying to undercut you, dirty tricks campaigns. You'll deal with the economics, customers saying, why do I want this? What is it for? You'll deal with every kind of obstacle there is, especially if you've got a compelling vision and you threaten existing interests, or if it's a new technology and people just are scared by what it could mean. So you have to have resilience as a leader. You have to be there to make that calm space around you for you and your team. And remember, your team is going to look to you. If they're following you for your vision, the team is going to need someone who's going to be there, their coach, their quarterback, someone who's going to help them deal with all this. So you have to have personal resilience, both for yourself and to help give the team space to succeed. Third thing, I mentioned this already, integrity. Now, when you're building something new, obviously sometimes you want to, promote it, and you might, I wouldn't exaggerate, but you would want to, this is where we're going as the vision. And the vision may not be fully realized yet. That's okay. So that's understood, but you have to have integrity. You can't blatantly make things up that don't work or promise things that aren't going to happen, because that's not vision. That's just simply lying, and that's fraud. So integrity is what I think differentiates vision from fraud. And unfortunately, there's many examples of charlatans and fraudulent ideas that never really were true visions. So have that integrity, and that's integrity as an individual, but also promote integrity within the team. Have values in your company or your organization that basically promotes, rewards integrity. Because if your team doesn't have integrity, they're not going to succeed. For example, customers will often come to us with questions about our product, and we've always told our sales team, like, if this product doesn't meet their needs, just tell them what. And if it's a competitor's product that works, tell them which competitor to go with, because you know what, they'll thank you, and it works. Many times we've had customers come to us when they work for a company and say, we need a product, testing product to do this, and we'll say, we'd love to be your customer, but for this particular case, we're not the right tool. Use this other tool from a competitor of ours. It will work better for you. And they say, oh, that's really nice of you, thanks. And then 3 years later, they'll come back and say, well, I'm working for somewhere else right now, and then the last time your tool wasn't a good fit, but I really appreciated the fact that you were honest with us. Would it work for this product? And the answer may be yes. And we're like, yes, it does. And you've already built that trust because you had integrity. So integrity is something that may take 20 years to have. You can lose it in one day. So that's the other thing with integrity. It takes years to earn and can be lost in minutes. So treasure it. Number 4, decisiveness. Now, you've got to be careful here. You shouldn't always be reckless. Decisiveness is not necessarily being reckless, but as a leader, you have to make decisions. And in the Marine Corps, who was one of my clients back in the day, they used to always say, a bad decision executed vigorously is better than waiting for the perfect decision. So definitely you have to be decisive. You can't be in analysis paralysis. Listen to your team, get the best information, get the analysis, make a decision, then execute 110% in that direction, and still obviously know to make changes if you need to, but you can't keep second guessing yourself and what ifing. And the last one is number 5 is empathy. If you're taking a team with you, you have to be empathetic to your team and to your customers and to other people that you're working with. Because if you're building a new business or a new idea or an innovative technology, people are going to be scared by it. People are not going to understand it. It's by empathy, by understanding, by putting yourself in their shoes, you get to see, if it's a customer, oh, I can see why this wouldn't work for them, because now I'm in their shoes looking at my product. I get that. It doesn't make sense for them, for their use case or their lifestyle or the way they do things. And for the team, same thing. Your team may be scared, or you need people to help you, and they don't get the vision, or they don't understand why they have to do this in a certain way. Have empathy, understand why they feel that way, and then bring them along with you. So empathy is a really important trait. So those are the 5 traits that you should have. And we're almost at time. So the last thing I want to do is wrap up very quickly and bring it all together. As leaders and future leaders in this room, hopefully, you need a unique set of skills. If you're going to indulge in innovation, and it's a fun, but it's stressful, you need to think about, how do you work across different disciplines? It's not just usually a technology. It's not a business thing. It's bringing it all together. You have to look across different disciplines, across your team, across the industries that you might work in. Maybe it's creative, maybe it's left brain, maybe it's right brain, maybe it's mathematics, maybe it's technology, maybe it's economics. Bring those skills together, and it's those integration of those different skills that lets you innovate. It's never usually just a technology or a new business. It's coming together. There are disruptions happening in every time period. I've been lucky to live through some of them. There's some coming, the AI, and there's things that we haven't even seen. There's a bunch of things I think that you're going to look forward to in your life. And as we go through these periods, it will change business, and you as a leader have to adapt. And the world does seem to go through these cycles of connection and disconnection, and you have to adapt to that as well. Businesses that survived, World War I, World War II, post-war world, end of the Cold War, globalization, pandemic, deglobalization. You have to adapt to all those different changes. And I think as leaders who are courageous, you have to know when to follow the wave, when this new innovation is coming, but also when to make a stand against the wave, when to make a difference, and how to make a difference. So with that, thank you for letting me be your keynote speaker. I wish you all the best success in the years ahead. Have great careers, great lives. Look after yourself, look after your communities, and remember, as business leaders, you have a responsibility to the world, not just to money.
Thank you, Adam. There's a reason why we asked you to be the keynote speaker, and you just proved to us why we were correct. And I can't say enough about thank you enough for what you the message you provided. It's an excellent introduction to the symposium and to the purpose of our symposium, and I thank you. And I love the way you summarized and exemplified the power of change in the space of technology, and how it all relates to leadership and how it all comes together. We are out of time. However, as the chair of the committee, I'm taking advantage of this opportunity, and I will ask you one thing, because I just want to ask you to, in a very succinct, short explanation, to talk a little bit about Inflectra. You created a company that's global. You created a company that's very successful. Listening to what you said, I can see why that happened. When I arrived at Northeastern a few years ago, about 8 years ago, one of the first things I experienced within the first year was what they called Innovation Day. And I thought, what is Innovation Day? And the idea was that we would come together for a few hours at the university, and we would talk about ideas and things that we could do, and improvements, and outside the box. And I thought, well, you can't do that in one day. I mean, what, you just come together and come up with innovations? I mean, it doesn't work that way. It's a process. You know, you're in the shower and you come up with a great idea and say, oh, wait a minute, I need to bring this up to my team and discuss it. And that's how innovation really works is, you know, Wozniak and Bill Gates came up with an idea on their own as high school students. And all of a sudden that took off. I mean, the same thing with so many of the other Steve Jobs and so many others. Steve Jobs and Wozniak and then Bill Gates. Now, the point, the question I have for you is, at Inflectra,
yep.
How do you pursue innovation knowing that you're in such a competitive industry? What do you, as a leader, how do you tell your people, I want you to think out of the box. I want you to think about creative ways of changing. We know that these other companies are all doing things differently. So how do you lead your organization to consider ways to change? You know, it's not going to happen overnight, and it's going to be a process. How do you do that?
Yeah, it's difficult because you know, like any company, we have a roadmap, we have improvements we have to deliver to existing customers. You have to be able to make those commitments, and you can't necessarily shirk those commitments. So it is difficult to make time for that. So what we try and do is, you know, once a year we'll try and get the teams together. We do what's called Inflectra Fest. It's our bringing the company together, and we've done it in person, which is expensive. You've got to fly everyone in, sales, marketing, product, everyone we can get together, and we'll have 3 days usually together to do a discussion around, imagine the world in the future. What would it look like? And have that blue sky. Turn off the phones. I mean, we obviously still have to do our day jobs, but we try and as much as possible disconnect from the day to day. And those 3 days aren't usually, as you said, the end of the story. It's the beginning. And one of the exercises I like to do is called the least worst idea. So Jim laughs because he's been through these. He's like, well, okay, I want the craziest ideas possible. Let's start with those and reverse backwards to what are sane ideas. Because what you find is in a group, I don't want to spend too long, but in a group, people are afraid of looking foolish. You should never be afraid of looking foolish. The great thing about being a CEO is you can do what you like because people you don't care. But everyone should feel that they can come up with an idea that might be crazy sounding, and you might start with the craziest ideas, and as you slowly get less crazy, least worst idea, you eventually get to an idea that maybe that isn't actually half bad, and you're like, yeah, we could do that. I think that's really important. Is you've got to de-blame, de-emote the conversation so people don't feel like if I say an idea and Adam thinks it's stupid, he's going to think I'm an idiot. So, because that's what people naturally think, like, oh, that was a stupid idea, I'm an idiot. And instead it's like, there's no bad ideas. And then usually I will come up with something outlandish to start with, like one time it was a marketing thing. Like, why don't I rappel down our competitor's building and put a giant banner on their window? And I'm like, and I hate heights, I could never do it. But you know, and then I was like, oh, that's a really stupid idea. I'm like, yeah, but okay, what's a less stupid idea? Well, we could do, and then we get some ideas that actually are practical and legal and moral.
Fantastic. Fantastic. And let me add one more thing to your leadership style that I've gained from knowing you is that in addition to everything you've added, you create within your environment something that I think is critical to leadership, and that is creating a safe psychological space. Mm-hmm. People, when you say crazy ideas, yeah, some people will not provide a crazy idea in front of their CEO because they'll say, oh, he's going to think I'm stupid. He's going to mark me down, whatever. But when you offer that opportunity, that's leadership. That's saying that no matter what you say, as long as it's doesn't hurt anybody, it doesn't infringe on anybody's personality. In other words, it's something that is just happens to be out there as a thought piece, is acceptable. And I appreciate that because that's the sign of leadership. And again, I appreciate the opportunity that you accepted to join us. And what a great introduction to our symposium. Adam, thank you very much for joining.
Thank you so much for having me. I saw some of the questions. I sorry I didn't get to answer any of them, but people made good points about Kodak and other people who missed the waves. Don't miss your own wave is what I would say. Be bold, be innovative, and try something.
Thank you so much. All right, everybody, we're going to take a break for about the next 5 to 10 minutes. At 10:15, we will start with our second presentation. So please join us. We're looking forward to it. And again, Adam, thank you for joining us and for that great introduction to our symposium.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. See you all in about 10 minutes, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.